Modern Iran is now a regional superpower whose influence extends far beyond its borders. Iranians are at the center of Middle Eastern political affairs, from Lebanon to Iraq to Gaza. For the US and Israel, its age-old foes, this growing influence is a cause for alarm. And yet, this fear is nothing new. From the first days of the Islamic Republic, Grand Ayatollah Khomeini spoke of the need to export the revolution, and his first target in 1982 was Lebanon.
At that time, Israel invaded Lebanon and proceeded to the heart of Beirut during 1 week. The Israeli troops captured Beirut too. Israel claimed that it wanted to arrest the Palestinian militants and drive them out of South Lebanon.
Khomeini was determined to build a force to counter the Israeli invaders, but rather than send his own troops into Lebanon, he opted for resistance by stealth. His ever-loyal Revolutionary Guards would become central in taking the fight to Israel, without ever leaving Iranian soil. Instead, Lebanese Shia volunteers would be brought to Iran for training by this crack unit.
He said, I will assign them a mission. They have to train young Lebanese forces to defend their own country, and they can drive out the enemy from their land with the background support of Iran.
So, following direct instructions from Khomeini, one of the Arab world's most feared and revered organizations was born, Hezbollah.
The foundation and formation of Hezbollah took shape with a very precise thinking of the Imam. Then the Lebanese forces were trained by the Revolutionary Guard in a very professional way in Camp Ginetta. Then they started their struggle against Israel.
As the Summer War of 2006 demonstrated, the struggle continues to this day. And since Mahmoud Ahmadinejad became president in 2005, relations between Iran and Israel have worsened immeasurably. Beyond the name-calling and rhetoric, the issue of nuclear proliferation has heightened tensions in an already unstable region. Israel's arsenal of nuclear weapons is a constant source of discomfort to its Middle Eastern neighbors and reinforces suspicions of Western double standards. At the same time, Iran's determination to pursue a nuclear program continues to cause unease in the West, despite repeated Iranian assurances that such technology would be used only for peaceful purposes.
I must explain that nuclear energy is different from nuclear weapons. Nuclear science and energy can improve and shift a country like an engine. The issue of nuclear science has been misinterpreted by politicians.
And the father of Iran's nuclear program under the Shah agrees that Iran has a right to develop nuclear power and not just for peaceful purposes.
Why should not Iran have it? We are in a region that Pakistan has it, Israel has it, India has it, Russia has it. How is it that everybody has it now? Iran should not have it. Now, who is the judge in the world? America? They want to decide for the whole world? We have seen what they have done in Iraq. We have seen what they have done in Afghanistan. They have also in mind to do something against Iran. Every day I get up, somebody in America or in Israel, they say, we attack Iran, we attack nuclear facilities in Iran, and so on. This is amazing. They have made the war a very aggressive war. Attacking Iran has become a normal thing that you hear every day. And they say Iran is aggressive. They say Iran is going to make the bomb.
Iran aggressively pursues these weapons and exports terror. States like these and their terrorist allies constitute an axis of evil.
The Bush administration made Iran its public enemy #1, characterizing it as a maverick nation hell-bent on harnessing nuclear power to further its sinister ambitions. And even with a new president in the White House, the axis of evil label has so far proven difficult to shed.
One of the things that the Iranians have not done, because they don't want to talk about the possibility that they'll try to develop nuclear weapons, is to explain to the rest of the world that Iran is still on the axis of evil, that Iran is still threatened by the United States, that American troops occupy the country immediately to the east of Iran, Afghanistan, immediately to the west of Iran, Iraq. To the south, the United States has nuclear-powered, nuclear-armed aircraft carriers in the Persian Gulf, and we have air bases north of Iran in Central Asia. I'd be scared to death if I was in Iran.
Yet many Americans claim that they too are scared by Iranian saber-rattling.
The concern that I think has been accentuated by Ahmadinejad's rhetoric is that there is a kind of aggressive desire to identify one group or one country in this region whose existence is not acceptable, and to wipe it off the face of the earth.
Today, Iran is an independent country and is not subordinate to any country in the world. It doesn't accept orders from any country. It has reached its goals, independence and no subordination. And we are at the peak of this independence. The whole world says you shouldn't possess nuclear science. The Iranian nation says we must have it. And so does the government.
The firebrand speeches of Ahmadinejad portray a nation united in its opposition to Western governments. But in truth, a battle continues behind the scenes, a battle for the very soul of the Islamic Revolution. The Islamic Republic is defined by two paradoxical political beliefs. On the one side are the ultra-conservative clerics and their followers, whose interests are represented by President Ahmadinejad. On the other side, you have the reformists, a more moderate face of the Republic, represented by former President Khatami.
If you look at basically the differences between the Khatami administration and the Ahmadinejad administration, you have the two poles. I mean, you have the two wings of the revolution still fighting it out. One that says that this is an Islamic republic with the emphasis on the republic, and the other saying this is with the emphasis on the Islamic. I mean, and the republic is actually rather irrelevant to everyone.
Under Ahmadinejad, Iran has pursued a policy of confrontation with the West. Economic sanctions have done nothing to soften this stance. But the more moderate Iranian political wing favors a different course.
Mr. Khatami introduced his theory of dialogue among civilizations in the United Nations and his theory of dialogue among cultures and religions. He was capable at that time to lower the tension, but Mr. Ahmadinejad has chosen a different method. In my opinion, this method has its losses and gains. We must remember that Ahmadinejad became president of Iran at a time when US President Bush used very strong language against Iran. Ahmadinejad in such a situation applied more offensive policies.
That is a natural consequence of, again, some of the pressures that were put upon Iran, particularly when Khatami was speaking about the dialogue among civilizations, was promoting basic freedoms, political rights in the country. Then suddenly Iran is put in the axis of evil, and a new series of threats against Iran are launched. This puts Iran in a very difficult circumstances. A lot of the radicalism that occurs in countries like Iran is a result of these pressures coming from abroad, particularly in countries where you're dealing with a long history of foreign intervention.
The Iranian presidential elections will take place in June this year. In global terms, the results may prove to be no less important than that of last November's American elections. But beneath the surface, Iranian society in the 21st century is surprisingly varied and nuanced. Revolution quickly set the nation on a path of conflict that continues to this day. Permanently at odds with Western values, constantly on the precipice of all-out conflict, modern-day Iran appears to have nothing whatsoever in common with its pre-revolutionary allies, such as the US and the UK.
The political elites in both Iran and the United States have enormous difficulties with each other. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And one wouldn't want to ascribe blame to one over the other. But I think there is a general surprise among Iranians as a whole that this dispute has gone on for quite so long. I mean, it's far longer than the dispute with Vietnam.
And yet Iran faces many of the same challenges within its society as those of its Western foes. Perhaps most surprisingly of all, it leads the world when it comes to a social ill often seen as an exclusively Western preserve, drug addiction. For Iran has the highest number of heroin addicts per head in the world. How extensive today is the problem of addiction that the Iranian government is dealing with? Do you know roughly in terms of numbers affected?
The estimated number of addicts in our country has been collated by researching the amount of in- and outpatients seeking treatment in the past few years. We have had between 1 million to 1.8 million seeking treatment.
About 6% of Iranians are reported to be regular users of opiates, compared to just 0.1% of Americans. How long is he has needle marks everywhere? How long has he been an addict? 25 years. But Iran has a drug treatment program that would be the envy of many Western nations. If the scale of Iran's drug problem is surprising, then its enlightened approach to the illnesses that addiction can cause is no less remarkable. With rates of HIV infection rising in tandem with intravenous drug use, the government has instituted a health awareness program that far exceeds its Middle Eastern neighbors in terms of its openness.
In many Islamic countries, it's difficult to bring up the issue of AIDS. In Islamic countries, there may be more taboos or sensitivities.
And whether one is talking about the West or the East, there are few more sensitive subjects than transsexuality. Yet, in Iran, sex changes are not only legal and state-funded, but seemingly sanctioned by the nation's original supreme leader.
Perhaps, contrary to what is perceived in other countries, sex change is more acceptable in Iran than other places. This is because Imam Khomeini issued a fatwa that we are among the sexual disordered categories, not sexually deviated categories. He said we can change sex to become a female, so we can choose our sex. There is even an advantage in Iran for us to change our names in the identity card. In most countries, the name doesn't change. But according to the Imam's fatwa and the law, transsexuals live more comfortably in Iran than other countries. We have rights and advantages here. The society and law have accepted us well. We don't have any problems in Iran.
However, the same cannot be said for others. In 2007, President Ahmadinejad drew widespread condemnation when he stated that there were no homosexuals in Iran.
در کشور ما چنین چیزی وجود ندارد. در ایران این چیزا وجود در ایران.
In fact, the truth is much darker. Homosexuals are routinely persecuted in Iran. And this is just one area where Iran's human rights record remains far from perfect.
It does not give any room for opposition. It does not give any leeway for people to express themselves. There's no freedom of expression. And this is the nature of this regime. And for me as an Iranian, a state that treats its opponents, its Iranian brothers and sisters, it's the people that it has to take care of. I mean, the priority of any government is towards its own people first.
This is the Ebrat Museum, set up to commemorate the human rights abuses of the former regime of the Shah and his brutal security service, Savak. There is even a somewhat macabre gift shop where you can take home a keyring with the mugshot of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei. But Iran's shameful human rights record is certainly not confined to a museum. In fact, state-sponsored abuse is one of the few constants to have survived the revolution. Hashem Sabagian claims to have been tortured both by pre- and post-revolutionary forces.
As far as I am concerned, as an arrested person in both regimes, the behavior of the previous regime was much better than the current regime's behavior with me. The encounter I had with the Shah's services whilst under arrest was very endurable and easier for me compared to what they did. I am not ready to go into more details.
But many of the clerics and their supporters insist that allegations of human rights abuses in Iran have been exaggerated for political ends.
Look, are human rights being respected in other places thoroughly? They are not maintained. There are problems in other places, and we have our problems too. There are many places where human rights are not observed. There are many problems. There is no pressure on them, but a full-scale pressure is on us. It's a political issue. I would like to tell the truth. We also have our problems and weaknesses. We have to solve them.
And one woman who is determined to solve such issues is Shireen Ebadi, whose legal career predates the revolution.
But after the revolution, they told me that because I am a woman, I cannot continue in this job. And they turned me and other female judges into ordinary office clerks in the Justice Ministry. I couldn't accept this. A short while after, they accepted my early retirement. I retired myself and became a lawyer.
And in the eyes of the law, women are often victims of inequality. Although they are allowed to vote from the age of 15, they are still legally second-class citizens. A woman is half a man, whether a witness in court or in divorce. The legal age of marriage is 13 for a girl and 15 for a boy. But the most visible symbol of this Islamic regime is that women are no longer entitled to choose what they wear. They must wear Islamic dress or hijab.
The young people feel that they have the right to decide about the way that they dress. On the other hand, the more traditional sectors of society, they fear the very consumerist, materialist type of model which is being promoted for women's advancement in the West. They fear that that would degrade her human dignity and it would be contrary to Islamic values. So there is this cultural debate, and it's a very serious issue.
Shireen Ebadi, who was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2003 as a result of her fearless campaigning, particularly for women's rights in Iran, agrees that there is still much work to be done.
The situation in Iran as far as human rights are concerned is far from ideal. That's why I'm in Iran and I've decided to live and work here to defend human rights. When everything is fine, there is no need for us to defend human rights.
But others suggest that women have actually made great strides under the Islamic Republic.
You have to have a holistic picture of what happened in Iran. We have challenges in terms of women's rights, but we also have women entering government in 1997. We have women becoming vice presidents in Iran. The growth rate of, for example, women entering university, it's huge.
At our universities, there are 58% girls and 42% boys. This shows a bright future to have an educated mother and family. We can benefit from it.
Increasingly more educated than Iranian men, Iran's women now represent about 30% of the workforce. But with unemployment at above 12.5%, many educated women, unable to find jobs that are suited to their qualifications, are looking for new ways to make ends meet. In 2006, the first female taxi drivers were recruited onto Tehran's streets. Although this service is exclusively for women, Araste gave me a glimpse into her life as a cab driver and as a woman in modern-day Iran.
I got this job through a newspaper advertisement. I understood from the advert that a taxi company was recruiting women taxi drivers in Iran for the first time. Since it was a first for this kind of job, I was more interested in doing it. We have satellite TV at our home, and when I watch the TV channels, I think that in comparison to other places, Iranians value women more. Here, men value women. It's not that our government does not allow certain things, it reacts to the culture of the society. So men should work, and women must have less social activities, and they should work at home. This is due to our culture, not something imposed by our government. There is no such objection for us. It's rather the common law of our society. Even my current job was looked upon as a male's job at first, due to society and traditions. We broke the tradition of the society. Now it's seen as normal. People have accepted it now, and the government has not put any hindrance in front of us. It was just a part of social customs.
As Iranians continue to define what the revolution has meant for them at home, internationally, the nation still struggles to be understood, and old enmities remain as strong as ever. The Islamic Revolution is one of the defining revolutions of the modern age. 30 years on, Iran is at another crossroads, trying to define itself for a new generation and in its relations with the West. Whatever happens next in this country will have an impact on the region and the world. But one thing is clear: the Islamic Republic is here to stay, and the world will have to accept that.